So imagine this, a candidate has spent the last 3, 4, 5 months intensely preparing for the MSRA, but on exam day, a couple of mistakes here and there end up costing invaluable points that can actually determine whether or not they get an offer in the specialty training of their choice. That can be quite frustrating. But the fact that you have clicked this video means that that won't be your case. So make sure you watch till the end. In this video, I'm going to be sharing some common mistakes that candidates make on exam day, but more importantly, how you can avoid them. Let's make sure that all your hard work pays off. So like this video and subscribe if you have not already. And let's get straight into it. I've also got some bonus points right at the end, so you don't want to miss those. I'm Maro. I'm a medical doctor based in the UK, and having landed a pretty good score in the MSRA, I thought it helpful to share some valuable tips for acing the exam. So I've got some videos which I believe you'll find very valuable. The feedback so far has been great, so you can go through them once you're done with this video. Today, I'm sharing some of the common mistakes that candidates make on exam day, but more importantly, how you can avoid them. So let's get straight into it. As we all know, the MSRA feels like a race against the clock for those who have written the exam before. Usually, the clinical problem solving skills section takes about 90 seconds per question, roughly, while the professional dilemma section should take about 2 minutes per question. This is not cut in stone. This is just like a rough guideline so that you can have an idea of how much time you should devote to each question. So here's the mistake. Some candidates encounter a single tough question and they get stuck on it. So this leaves them limited time to tackle the remaining questions, and they find themselves scrambling through because they were trying to figure out the harder ones and get it perfectly right. So here are 2 things that you should do to avoid this mistake. Number 1, make use of the flagging feature. So if a question is taking too long or you're finding yourself spending too much time trying to figure out what the answers might be, please click the flag button so that when you have time later on, you can come back to the question and answer it appropriately. Number 2, keep a mental checkpoint. What does this mean? So you have your clock right on your screen. You should be able to figure out, okay, so I'm doing the professional dilemma section. It takes 90 minutes. I can't remember how many minutes it takes. But by the time I'm halfway through these questions, by the time I've solved 25 questions, it should be about 45 minutes. So that helps to pace yourself and you're able to know, okay, I think I'm lagging behind. I should pick up pace. I should increase my momentum just by keeping an eye on the clock and pacing yourself. So those 2 things are very important to ensure that you're effectively managing your time. Make use of the flag feature and keep a mental checkpoint off the clock. But here is a pro tip. Regarding the flag feature, please don't overdo it. You don't want to flag every question that you're unfamiliar with or that you're struggling with. You want to do it very wisely. You have to be very selective. This is because if you flag too many questions, when it's time to review, it can end up taking so much time and you find out that you don't actually have that time to go through all your flagged questions. So be very selective. So next up, we're going to tackle an even sneakier mistake that trips people up, especially in the SJT section. Candidates tend to overthink scenarios. They add layers of complexity, imagining what-if situations that aren't even in the scenario that was presented. So for example, a question about patient confidentiality, and then you start reasoning about things that were not mentioned in the question. What are the hospital's internal policies about this? What did the patient say before she went unconscious? It was not stated. So stick with the information presented in the question. Limit yourself to just what is presented. Don't overthink. Don't go beyond what has been given. And keep in mind your GMC Good Medical Practice Guidelines. That's all you need. The question before you and your GMC Good Medical Practice Guidelines. If a scenario says a colleague is acting unprofessionally, don't start thinking, okay, maybe she had a difficult day the morning before or she uses drugs when it was not stated in the question. So don't overthink, deal with the issue at face value. What about the clinical problem solving section? That one has its own pitfalls as well. So let's talk about them next. So when it comes to the CPS section, you may have experienced this maybe during your mocks or if you've written the exam in the past. You start the test feeling confident, then you hit a difficult question and your confidence level just plummets and it affects how you approach subsequent questions. That is one very common mistake that you have to avoid. Candidates go wrong with this because they assume that the test gets harder as it progresses. So by the time they hit an easy question after strings of difficult questions, they start second guessing themselves and thinking there might be a catch. This question is too easy. It should be hard. There should be a trick here. They start spending too long on a clearly straightforward question. They start second guessing the obvious answer. But here's the truth. The difficulty level varies throughout the entire course of the exam. So you might find difficult questions interspersed with relatively easy questions. Don't project and think that the exam or the question should get progressively harder. You'll end up tripping yourself up. So you might get an easy question right after a difficult one and vice versa. So what should you do? Treat each question independently. Forget about the last one. It's done. It was difficult. Yes, no problem. Or it was easy. All right, no wahala. Move on to the next question and treat it independently. And when you encounter a tough question, please don't let it affect your confidence. Don't let it impact the way you approach the subsequent questions you come across. Remember that every question counts. In the CPS, all the questions, they have the same weight, the same value. So treat each question independently. Give your best with each question and don't spend an unnecessary amount of time on a question. So next up, we'll cover a mistake that's all about paying attention to detail. This one is so simple, yet so costly. And it is this: not reading the question stem carefully. So imagine this: the clock is ticking, you're rushing through a clinical question, and you fail to recognize that what was written was least likely and not most likely. That alone can make you lose a valuable point. You don't want to make that kind of mistake. So be very thorough when you go through each question stem. You want to know whether they're asking for the initial investigation or the most appropriate. That's an easy mark that can be lost because you have just overlooked one word. Candidates often skim through the questions. They are looking out for clincher words. They are looking through the options to figure out the answer quickly and end up missing very important but simple differences in the way the question is presented. So please always look out for those. So this leads me to the next common mistake. It's very closely related to this one that I just discussed. And this mistake is selecting the first answer that looks right without going through all the options. So why does this problem exist? This is because this exam has been designed with something called distractors incorporated into both the question stem and even the options. So there might be some options that may appear appropriate but are not entirely correct. There might also be some options that are actually appropriate, but there might just be a more appropriate option than the one you've seen or you've identified. It's for that reason why a couple of people do make the mistake of rushing to select the first answer that they think is actually right when there's something that's even more appropriate than that. So what's the fix? It's always advisable to go through all the options thoroughly without rushing to select the one that you think is right. And this challenge is even more particular in the multiple options section of the PDS, the professional dilemmas, where you're told to pick the 3 best options. There might actually be up to 5 appropriate options. In that case, it's very important that you do not rush to select the first 3 options that you think are right. Make sure you go through all the options in the question before you select the most appropriate 3. So the next mistake that is quite common, I fell a victim to this, especially in my first attempt of this exam, and it's very peculiar to the professional dilemmas. People may make this mistake also in the clinical section, but for some reason, it's quite peculiar to the professional dilemmas because that section of the exam is very subjective. So there's a lot of self-doubt. And what's this mistake? Changing your answers repeatedly because you're not sure of yourself. Why is this a problem? Studies have shown that most of the time, your first instinct is often correct unless you notice a clear mistake. So when you find yourself second-guessing yourself excessively, it might just be an indication that you're probably just anxious and overwhelmed and stressed out by the exam. At that point, what you need to do is just calm yourself down, take in deep breaths, remind yourself that you've prepared effectively for this exam, and focus on the fact that you have a solid repertoire of information which you have gathered over the previous months. And just be confident in your approach. Be confident. Don't let self-doubt creep in. Don't let anxiety creep in, because when you start changing your answers repeatedly, your final choice ends up being an incorrect option, and you don't want that to happen. So trust your preparation and only change an answer if you realize that you have misread the question or you have misread the options. So that's when you can be confident enough to change your answers. Next up, we'll talk about something that doesn't really involve questions at all, but can make or break your exam day experience. And that's you. Yes, you, both your mental and your physical state. So you want to make sure that those are in top form. What do I mean by this? Some people make the mistake of ignoring their mental and physical well-being prior to the exam day and on the exam day. What can you do to fix this? Make sure you have sufficient sleep prior to your exam. You don't want to spend the eve of your exam poring over endless study materials, depriving yourself of much needed sleep and rest. That will only end up making you feel more stressed and more anxious on exam day. You want to have a good breakfast in the morning of your exam. Remember, the exam feels like a marathon. You want to be able to handle both the physical and the mental pressure that the exam naturally comes with. And that requires you having a good breakfast, staying properly hydrated, making sure that you had sufficient rest the night before, and not letting anything stress or distract you. Preparing all your materials the night before, so your identification documents, finding out the venue of your exam, If you're going to write the exam remotely, you want to be sure that the computer device you're going to be using for the exam is running smoothly. You want to ensure that everything is put in place to make sure that the day of your exam, there's no glitch. Arrive early to avoid unnecessary stress. Speaking from personal experience, my last exam didn't start on a good note because I didn't arrive at my exam venue on time. So there was a lot of panic, a lot of anxiety upon arrival. So I spent the first 15 minutes of my professional dilemma exam just trying to settle. And my exam time, the clock was already going. I could end up spending like 2-3 minutes on one question, just reading over the line over and over again, just because of that added pressure and the fact that I arrived late and I was anxious and my mind was just all over the place. Thankfully, it ended on a good note. But please, I don't want that to be you. So make sure you got everything well prepared. You know where you're going. You got your ID documents on time. You arrange your transport, your commute to the place, ensuring that you arrive at least 15-20 minutes before the time that your exam is supposed to start to avoid all of that. And here is a mindset hack. You've had a couple of mocks leading up to the exam. So on the exam day, treat the MSRA like another mock. That will help to reduce the level of anxiety and stress that is commonly associated with the exam. So just take it as another day of your mock, but this time with more focus and more intentionality. Another exam day mistake that a lot of people make is worrying about other candidates. So sometimes you might fall into the temptation of looking at another candidate and judging their confidence, comparing it to yourself. You might feel like, this person looks very confident, and letting that rattle you. Don't feel like, oh, this person has finished their exam on time and I'm still writing. Don't let all of that get to you. It's been shown that sometimes those kinds of observations and mental comparisons can actually impact your performance on the exam. It can make you feel unnecessarily stressed, unnecessarily anxious. It can disrupt your focus, and very importantly, it can disrupt your confidence. You do not want anything to affect your confidence on the day of the exam. So remember that everyone is writing their exam. Focus on your own pace and on your own performance. Do not look at somebody else. Don't let unnecessary comparison affect you. This next mistake I'm going to talk about is one that is common to people taking their exams remotely. However, it can also affect people who take their exams in physical settings, right? And this is panicking during technical glitches. So for example, you're writing your exam and the power goes out. Let's say you're in or the computer starts hanging, or the internet crashes, or some other technical glitch takes place. Don't start panicking. Don't let that get you stressed out. Don't let that get you anxious, because responding that way will only negatively impact on your performance, and you do not want that to happen. So whenever something like that happens, relax, stay calm. If it's a situation that's peculiar to just you, make sure you alert the invigilator. They have the obligation to provide necessary support and assistance. So I have 2 bonus points. These are so important. The first one is, don't go into the exam without going through the person view test interface. And it gives you an idea of how the exam is going to be presented on your computer on the exam day. What this does for your mind is that it helps to prime your mind for exam day, so that on the day of the exam, when you appear for your test and you see the test interface, you're not taken aback. It's not new. It feels familiar. And that familiarity helps significantly to reduce the amount of tension and stress that you might be feeling on exam day, because most of the question marks may not have that same interface. But having a taste of it from the Pearson VUE website significantly helps to reduce your anxiety on the day of the exam. So don't go for your exam without practicing with it. Secondly, do not underestimate the power of calm. Speaking from personal experience, when you start noticing that for some reason you're lagging behind time, you've checked your clock, you've not covered as many questions that you should have covered at a certain time, you start feeling panicky and anxious, and you're encountering questions that are quite tough, they are taking your time, that's not the time to give in to the anxiety. It might just be a sign that you need to just take a few seconds, 5-10 seconds, close your eyes, take in a deep breath, remind yourself that you're confident and that you will be able to go through this exam successfully. That significantly helps to improve the state of your mind, so that you're able to focus better, you're more confident, you're less anxious, and you're able to go through the questions with greater speed and accuracy. Don't underestimate the power of having a calm mind. Remember, a calm mind is a sharp mind. If you're preparing for the MSRA, please let me know in the comments which of these tips you found helpful. And if you've written the exam before and you have some extra tips up your sleeves, kindly leave them in the comment section so that we can all benefit from those tips. I'm glad you watched up until this point. I do hope that this video has been helpful for you, and I wish you success in your exam. I've got another video where I discuss some of the myths about the professional dilemma section of the exam. If you haven't watched it yet, I believe it will be helpful for you. See you in my next video.